Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition and Life podcast. This is where we look at various nutrition and fitness-related topics through the lens of application. We want to give you practical takeaways so that you can create your healthiest, best self backed by knowledge. Now, on to the episode with your host, Coach Lisa.
Hello, and welcome back to the Nutrition and Life podcast. My name is Lisa, I'm your host, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with holistic nutrition coach Taylor Seibel. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm also very excited. I love podcasting. I haven't had an opportunity to in quite a while, but something that I enjoy is just being able to free flow and kind of come off the top of my head and hopefully give out some information that I've worked very hard to gain.
Awesome. Thank you. And I would love to just hear how you got into the whole nutrition coaching space, but particularly more like holistic nutrition.
That's tricky. So basically I started off being like, I guess like fairly overweight and definitely had very low self-esteem for like the earlier part of my life. And then at some point when I was getting deeper and deeper into athletics, I found it strength training. And then that was like my first kind of like passion was just strength training because I felt like I was able to have control over variables in my life that I otherwise didn't have control over. And at that point, control was a really cool thing. Now I'm kind of like working on not having control of anything, but it's like a whole 360. Regardless, over time, I kind of figured out that it's like, man, my progress just isn't as good as it could be. But why? And then everyone was like, you just have to like eat like this. And I was like, no, I don't want to eat like that. I don't want to like give up all these things I really enjoy. And eventually I hit a point where I was sort of forced to, because my gut was just like not in a spot where I was able to tolerate any food, really. And then hormonally, I was not in a great spot. I had like very, very low testosterone in like my early 20s. And it's like, wow, there's got to be a better way. So I was going to the different doctors, getting blood work. Seemingly nobody had any kind of answer. And really what kind of got me into this whole side of things was I sort of had to be my own doctor and like solve all these problems that literally nobody could come up with the answers for. I was like, oh my God, okay, there's got to be somewhere to find this stuff. And it turns out there really isn't. Like you really like outside of like the rare occasion of like hiring the right person, like there is very, very few people to be able to trust with your health in like a 360-degree view.
I agree with that. And I like what you said about being your own doctor, not necessarily that everyone has to do that, but I always refer to myself as my own guinea pig in the sense of like I like to experiment with different supplements or even just like, hey, let's tweak this in training and see what kind of effect comes from that. And I think it's just maybe not sad, but it's a little bit if people are just like stuck in one way and never want to try something else, as you say, you might feel okay, but you might never know what optimal feels like. And that, of course, is the whole essence of self-development and striving for self-improvement, etc., which I like to always, I guess, emphasize or advocate for a little bit as well. But you also, I saw on your profile that you also like or start with behavioral and lifestyle changes with your clients and not just obviously with your own health. And I'm curious if you have any maybe like basic foundations or any non-negotiables that you always like to address first, or perhaps it's always individual dependent. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I have some fundamental things that I think everybody needs, like sunlight in the morning, moonlight in the evening time, putting your feet in the grass. Like, I think these are like meditating. I think these are all like fundamental baselines that should be in place if you just want to be a good human. Really, everything else kind of layers on top of those because at the end of the day, we are light-based creatures. So in order for our biology to work properly, that's literally required. Like there is no escaping it.
Totally. I like what you said about the feet in the grass. I mean, I think at the moment we hear more and more about the morning sunlight viewing, and it's becoming a little bit more popular thanks to Andrew Huberman or a lot of other people out there. But the whole grounding concept has kind of fallen a little bit into, or it's more like hippie associated, I guess, perhaps. I personally have been trying to do grounding in the morning for a long period of time, like always, first thing, maybe not first thing, but one of the within the first hour of the day, stepping outside into grass or some sort of ground, natural ground. And this is really the first place. So I'm here in Bogota in Colombia, which is the capital. It's a metropolitan city. And I'm normally someone, I have always preferred living in warm spots, and it's not super, super warm here, and be close to either the lake or the ocean, some sort of nature. So this is the first location that I'm at for longer periods of time, which is metropolitan. And one of the first things that I have craved so much, especially in the first few weeks, was I need to go outside. I can't go outside bare feet. Like it's just not going to work. I got a grounding mat to compensate for it a little bit. It's not really doing the same thing. Like, I'm a very, very central person. So like when I step my feet on the ground or on the grass, and the grass is still a little bit damp, or you hear the birds chirping at the same time, and all that, like it all comes together. It just enhances that grounding experience versus stepping on a grounding mat in a gray trist or like gray apartment that doesn't have much else going for it. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think for you, maybe one of the easier implementations would be just like some grounding sandals where they have conductive webbing like on the sandals and then copper plating on the bottom. I think those have been a big game changer. And for me, even I just think it's more efficient rather than having to go and like find grass or anything like that. Like standing on concrete's plenty.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's very true. A good point. Yeah, I should go and check that out. And I also see that you, just like I do, you have an aura ring. So I presume sleep is another important pillar for you or your clients.
Yeah, yeah. I don't emphasize sleep as much as I could, only because although I do think it's probably the most important aspect, it's also the least adjustable aspect for a lot of people because they literally just don't have more time in the day. So I just do my best to optimize those variables as much as I can in terms of temperature, environment, all of that kind of stuff. But in like the area surrounding sleep in terms of like waking up, going to bed. But sometimes literally somebody can only get 5 hours or 6 hours. Like I can't just be like, oh, well, you're a terrible person because you can only sleep for 6 hours. It's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to do something, and then bring in things like nootropics and like there's different aspects, but it really comes down to seeing like what is this person's baseline way of being and what holes do I need to fill to get them to what I deem as optimal for them and what they want to achieve.
That's such a good point. I mean, sometimes as coaches, I believe we, or for me at least, it's sometimes it is a challenge to see things even more from the client's perspective. And of course, I can encourage people to get a little bit more sleep, even if it's just 10 minutes more, 30 minutes more, whatever. But sometimes it's just they just either don't want to make it more of a priority, or it's just literally not possible. And thinking back to my own days of working shift work many years ago, if someone would have told me then, you just need to sleep more, I would have been like, well, I cannot. It's literally, I cannot. I just wake up after 4 or 5 hours. Like there is no way. And you can only talk about the science so much. I was well aware of the negative impacts on my own health, but it just was not an option. So as you say, optimizing what you got in those scenarios is, I think, really, really important, and kind of coming off of the high horse as a coach during those times and just meeting the person where they're at is the best thing that we can do. And that kind of leads me nicely into something else I wanted to talk to you about, or that we connected over, and that was I guess just various personality aspect, and we can express that in so many different tests or forms or whatever. I personally have done a few certifications on neurotyping a few years ago, thought it was incredibly interesting. So for anyone who's listening, who's not familiar with neurotyping, it's basically 5 different types of people, or you kind of distinguish between 5 different kinds of people depending on their neurotransmitter dominance. And we'll get a little bit more into the details later on, but that's one thing. And we also talked about Enneagrams and human design, etc. And maybe you can give the listeners a little bit of a, maybe not overview, but like maybe a small explanation as to what the different types are, and maybe also how we can use that to our advantage for nutrition training, just everyday life.
Yeah, so I think I might have some interesting perspectives on some of this stuff, but I also, most of the people that I spend time around in person are like, energy healers or shamans or what, like I just have like a weird life. Like it's just the way it is. So I just have like interesting thoughts on things. But in terms of these like assessments as a whole, I like astrology and human design the best because they take out personal bias, and it's literally defined by like when were you born, where were you born, etc. It's not like, oh, like what kind of mood am I in today? How could I like tweak my answer to this question? Like it's very unbiased, which I think gives a much greater accuracy in the feedback versus like Enneagrams or like, Jordan Peterson's personality test or even neurotyping. They all have faults and there's human error and subjectivity. So with human design, I think it's more relevant than astrology in the sense of you can understand what your actual energetic type is and how to design your life around that, right? So you have like generators, manifesting generators, projectors, reflectors, and manifestors, I think is really what it is. But ultimately, what I think is the most important aspect of like each of these different types is that, for example, like I'm a generator. I know that if I just literally all I have to do in life is do things that I think are fun and that keep me excited. Like if I start to feel closed off, I know I'm doing the wrong things. Like that's it. Like that's my only guiding light in life. Like if I don't feel good, I have to stop it and do something else. Versus like you're a projector, like you need a lot more rest. You need to like not be just like going and crushing life all the time and probably getting a lot more sleep and sleeping. Maybe I need 6 hours of sleep and you need like 10 hours of sleep. There's ultimately you're more of like a way shower and I'm more of just like the one that's actively just laying the bricks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. And what drew me to human design is that it's also, as you mentioned, it's based on birth time and place, etc. But also a little bit in there, the chakra system. So in the sense of, you have your heart chakra and your throat chakra and all that. So a little bit that was something I was interested in prior to finding human design as well. And astrology for me has always sounded a little bit more or too abstract, I guess. And the human design found a nice middle way, I guess, between that. And I think some of these I don't know how you want to classify them, but some of these, I guess, systems can give, or what it has given to me is just more permission to be yourself. Because we often think we all need to be the same, or it's just common. So again, for me, I'm a projector, so that means I need more rest. And of course, as someone who's even more like introverted, etc., the times that I recharge is when I'm alone, in order to show up as my best self, I guess. And so if I just look into society, and society tells me I need to work 10 to 12 hours per day, and I need to do this and this and this, and rest is bad, and blah, 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 and then I'm just going to run myself into the ground and be unhappy because I think I need to be like everyone else. But if I look into the system and I know, okay, it's okay for me to rest more, because then in the fewer hours that I do work, I can show up as my better self, and I can actually get sometimes more done than other people, or at least can bring forward my best work. I think that's really great. That's what it's just shown me, more permission to be me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it also gives you, especially like in terms of business, it gives you a lot of nice guiding posts in terms of like what you should and shouldn't be doing. So if I was like, oh, I'm like a female gut health coach and like that's all I do, but I absolutely like didn't get excited by that, that would make no sense.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
like, well, truthfully, I get excited by a lot of things. So like I don't really have a niche, although everybody on the internet says that you should have a niche. I don't. And it seems to be doing okay. But I think like you said, just having permission to just be yourself and not live based on the constraints that I guess society or your parents or whoever, like however you were kind of brought up, like placed on you, and making your own path, I think is really what they provide the most.
Absolutely. And you already explained nicely two of the types. So again, my type, projector, in the sense of being more of like a guide or inspiration to others, perhaps, and your type, the generator, the path layer, the doers, I guess. And then the other three types having the reflectors, the manifestors, and the manifesting generators. Would you be able to just like touch on them very briefly? What maybe some common traits are for these types?
Yeah, so to my understanding, reflectors are very rare. Like they're
Mhm.
really just almost like acting as a mirror to you, right? Like it's somebody that it's almost like the way, because I view astrology in a similar-ish way, in the sense of well, I guess that's maybe not relevant, but there's certain aspects of a reflector that remind me of, like, for example, I'm a Scorpio. My brother's a Scorpio rising. What that tells me is like, oh, like when I see him, that's like showing me certain aspects of myself that I need to either like acknowledge or to heal or just be like, oh wow, this is really cool, or whatever. Like it's just giving you some different insights. And it seems to be that's where the most value is there. Versus manifestors are seemingly just like you would think, manifesting things. They're very diligent on their vision forward and pulling things in and attracting them. Versus manifesting generators are kind of like a combination of a generator and a manifestor, where really you're getting like, I guess like the workhorse-ish aspects of like a generator, but they're also having the ability to just pull things in at their own leisure. Versus like anybody can truly manifest, but I think that the superpower of a manifestor is literally that ability. It's like you can manifest whatever you want in life, ultimately to some degree, but yeah, it's more so pronounced with each individual type. Because it's not like in isolation, like you could like, oh, Lisa, you can never work hard because you're a projector. You just need to sleep like 24/7. It's like obviously everything runs on a spectrum. It's not like there's not really extremes. It's more of like a bias toward like one thing over another.
Absolutely. I think those were some really good brief descriptions, though. And so, for anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more about human design, I highly encourage you to go and check it out on Google, just typing in human design. And then there are some free websites where you can get your human design chart, is what it's called. And again, amongst these 5 different types, there are also really a lot more distinguishing features or characteristics, as you might want to call them. So there are certain gates and certain themes, non-self themes, etc., or certain things that each particular type should be looking out for. And again, I find that super, super helpful. So for example, for a projector, the non-self theme is bitterness. And that means whenever I feel bitter, I know that I'm out of alignment with what really serves me best. So I forgot what is it, as a generator. I think it's frustration or something like that. So yeah, whenever you feel frustrated, so again, like these things can just be helpful in your day-to-day life if you kind of go through that. Or then there are certain things that each particular type on the flip side works best with. So for example, as a projector, we tend to come off a little bit strong sometimes, and because of that, it's a better strategy is to wait for an invitation. That means I'm not someone I'm supposed to make the first step in a lot of things or initiating things. That's more like the generating or the manifestor type, etc. I'm supposed to be waiting for someone to approach me, and that again helps me also in, for example, what you mentioned, sales strategy. I'm not someone who's likely going to thrive having tons of ads out there, being in people's faces and really pushing stuff. I'm probably more someone, if someone messages me like, hey, Lisa, I have a question about this nutrition, blah, 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 I have an issue there. Could you, do you have any advice? And then I answer them back, and a conversation might emerge, and then they turn into a client. So again, it's just helpful strategies for life, but also business potentially. So I really encourage everyone to go and check out their own human design chart.
Yeah, I think mine is more so like waiting for something to respond to. So I can be really good at things like consulting and things that like give me like cute scenarios to come up with unique responses to, because number one, that excites me and it allows a part of my creativity to thrive, but it also plays really well into my human type, because literally that's all I'm supposed to do is like just wait for things to respond to.
Awesome. Yeah. And do you feel like any of this, like human design, astrology, neurotyping, whatever it might be, has helped you in your coaching practice or become an even better coach as well?
Yeah, a ton. I don't think I would be anywhere near the same level of understanding without these tools. And I think there's a lot of people that are, honestly, a lot smarter than me that are much less effective in what they do because they don't have any human aspect to what they do. And they don't understand how humans might work, and that there's other, contributing factors besides like, oh, you're a human, you need to sleep 8 hours and do that. Like it's like a checklist versus like, okay, who are you actually?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes the biggest difference. And understanding that, whether it's, there's multiple things that have led to these thought processes, I suppose, but I think that in and of itself is a valuable aspect of it. It's just understanding that there is the possibility that people may be different from yourself.
That's a very, very good point. I'm curious then about your coaching process. Do you tend to talk with people on the phone? Do you have a certain intake form, or is it literally just like, you asking them questions so you can get to know them best? And do you speak with, or how regularly do you speak with them?
I have, what do we want to call it? So most of my clients I just acquire through either like word of mouth, like referral type stuff, or from Instagram, like people just like DMing me. Or like the occasional person like fills out an application, but that's like more the exception than the rule for sure. And then I'll have like talk with them, get their intake information, have like a 90-ish minute like onboarding call. And then I really just have like two coaching options. Either like we could just do everything through WhatsApp, and I send like screen recorded like check-in responses every week based on how they fill out their sheet and stuff like that. We'll like chat throughout the week, or have a considerably higher coaching option that has like weekly or bi-weekly calls. So then we just like get on a Zoom call for 45 or 60 minutes or whatever. Really, like I'm fairly flexible. It really just depends if we have enough things to cover in that time, because I'm just not much for small talk. So if we're just gonna like sit there and be like, "Oh, how's the weather?" Like obviously I'm just gonna be like, "Hey, I gotta go. This is gonna be silly to talk for longer." But if there's like something worthwhile to talk about, then I'll gladly do it.
That's awesome. And do you include training in your coaching as well, or is it mostly nutrition, lifestyle?
No, everything I do centers around training, and everything else. So like when I program, I think about training first and everything else second.
Okay, cool. Amazing. Yeah.
Well, it's the biggest stress that we can control. Like I think it's the most valuable thing to be able to like put at the forefront, because it's like really you can't like take away work or kids or whatever. It's like you can decrease training volume really fast. And like that's the number one way to decrease somebody's stress load.
That's a really, really good point. And yeah, as you say, it's well, not easily manipulable, but it's definitely something that we can also track more easily, etc. And before we started recording, you mentioned you also have a strength coach mentor that you've been working with for some time, that you have been learning from for some time. And I was wondering if you have any like main things you have learned from him over the past few months or however long you have been working with him, where you were like, whoa, this has like completely changed my approach to training, or I'm going to from now on always implement XYZ with everybody?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the most important things to just understand as a whole is that the more reps you do in the gym, the more fatigue you accrue. So a set of 20 is a lot more fatiguing than a set of 5. Because in every single set you do, there's only 5 reps, the last 5 before hitting failure, that grow literally any muscle at all. So there's other benefits to higher reps in terms of like, being able to store more glycogen and have like a more like full muscle look, or there's other benefits to different types of training. But most people generally want to be stronger and have more muscle and be leaner. So in that scenario, I think that the most relevant thing to understand is that everything you do has a fatigue cost. And the more fatigue that you gain throughout the workout, throughout the week, is going to potentially hinder your ability to progress. Because if you have an excess amount of fatigue, it directly slows down the rate you can build muscle and gain strength.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah.
Like a lot. Like you could literally make far better progress doing like half the amount of work in the right scenario, like multiple times better progress, because your body's actually able to adapt properly. Because most people want to get super sore, create all this damage. Muscle damage is actually like more of a byproduct that you're not necessarily aiming for, because when you create damage, your body has to first repair the damage and then build muscle. So you're digging yourself, or like filling the hole that you just dug and then trying to exceed that, versus if you create the minimal amount of damage, you're able to make more progress faster because you're not digging yourself out of a hole.
That absolutely makes sense, actually. I guess a lot of people sometimes think, with higher reps, then they don't need to load as heavy, especially women, I guess, think in that sense. Or maybe with a higher reps, then you don't, if let's say if you have 5 reps only, then you might need more rest time in between, or you might need more sets, for instance. And so sometimes perhaps the thought is, with 20 reps, I can get away with 2 sets or 3 or whatever. What sort of rep scheme do you personally, or not rep, but set and rep scheme, I guess, do you follow then?
So if we're looking at the idea that if you want to build muscle, you have to get stimulating reps, and those are only the last 5 reps to a set to failure, then it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're getting enough stimulating reps, which seems to be about 15 at the low end per muscle per workout. So that would mean 3 sets to total failure. You could do like, I don't know, 6 or 7 sets with like 2 reps in the tank. But if you're getting to the point, or you're not getting to the point where the last reps you're doing in a set are very slow and very hard, you're probably not building any muscle.
I agree, actually. Yeah, I was just talking to someone else, and totally agree that most people, you think, yeah, like, oh, I'm feeling this muscle, I'm probably close to failure, I'm going to stop. And it's just so evident that most people stop too soon. I mean, of course, again, in the realm of safety and everything else, but occasionally, or more pushing to failure rather than not, is, I think, beneficial for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think most people would. So what I like to do, depending on what the person, like who the person is and what their goals are and stuff, but let's say, I don't know, let's say like a 50-year-old woman came to me and she had like some like minor gut and hormone issues. And I realized like, okay, I definitely can't do higher reps because she's not going to be able to recover from that amount of fatigue. I can't do a bunch of like slow lowering phases or pauses because she can't recover from the damage. We're probably going to do mostly sets of like 3 to 8. Probably not very many pauses, probably no longer than like a 4-second eccentric. And I'm probably, if she wants to build more muscle, going to pick mostly stable movements that fit her current movement capabilities. So maybe she's like, oh, like I'm struggling with like glute activation. Like I can never get my glutes to like work. It's like, well, glute activation is usually attacked wrong, because most of the time people are using super high reps, but they're not able to actually reach full recruitment of their muscles because the fatigue blocks that from happening. Like literally directly, like will not let you activate all the fibers. So a better solution would be taking, a 5 to 7 rep max and doing 0 to 1 rep in the tank with controlled reps. Maybe it was like a single leg glute leg press or something like that, where you're like very stable. You don't have to worry about coordination and you can just push really, really hard. And this will teach you over time to be able to increase what's called voluntary activation, meaning you're able to use more of the available muscle fibers in a given muscle. Versus usually people are just trying to chase fatigue or the burn or the pump or whatever. None of that actually increases activation. You're not trying to just like increase like tiny portions of muscle fibers. You want to have the most amount of muscle fibers humanly possible within that muscle. Like you want your whole glute firing, not just like this small portion of your glute. Like it's just not going to contribute to much growth if you do that.
That's a really good point. I like that. I think that's an amazing takeaway in the sense of well, maybe your banded glute kickbacks are not the best way to activate your full muscle or your full glute, I guess. So really, really good. Did you say about 3 to 8 rep range type of thing?
Yeah. So one method that I'll use, let's say if somebody's able to squat with good technique, let's say, and they want to build strength. Maybe we're like, okay, maybe we did 5 sets of 5 with like a 7 rep max. So then we're getting 3 stimulating reps every set. We're hitting 15 total reps on the low end. And maybe it was more of like a balanced squat. So we're getting like glutes and quads and adductors. So we're like, cool. Then maybe you really wanted to push growth. So you threw in like a glute bridge, or maybe you wanted to get like glutes and hamstrings. So you did like a 45-degree hip extension for like 3 sets to failure. It's like, great. Now you probably got 30 total stimulating reps for your glutes. You did 2 movements and like 8 total sets. And then your quads and your adductors still got hit really well too. So that would be a really efficient way to train glutes. If you didn't want to grow a bunch of quads and you wanted more of like a glute and a hamstring, like dominant look to your physique, like most women would prefer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great point. And just again, of course, I think it often depends on the exercise per se, with like isolation work or so. It might be beneficial maybe sometimes in the 10, 15 rep range or whatever, as opposed to the lower one. Let's talk about, like, for example, kickbacks or lateral raises or whatever it might be. But yeah, generally for compounds like that, an rep scheme, set scheme like that sounds absolutely perfect and totally makes sense from the way that you explained it.
I still think even kickbacks and lateral raises, you'd still grow better doing like sets of like 5 to 8.
Right.
But
okay.
Most people, when they think of like 5 reps on a lateral raise, like they're thinking with their ego rather than a weight they can actually handle for 5 reps on a lateral raise. Like good technique and maybe a pause. Like it's like that's the difference. It's like it still grows muscle just the same. People are just thinking like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna have to use such a heavy weight, and then they go from like 10 pounds to like 30s. You're like, okay, maybe you just need to go to like 15. Like maybe you didn't need to jump to 30s, didn't have like super crappy technique. It's like it's still, regardless, like there's still only 5 effective reps. But if you wanted to be like, oh, I want to increase my ability to like store glycogen and make your muscles just like look rounder, but not necessarily grow more actual like fibrous, dense tissue, because that's not going to necessarily do that. You could do something like a Vince Gironda method, like 6 sets of 6 or like 8 sets of 8 with 30-second rest periods and get like a super crazy pump. And that's going to leave you with that like swelled like look, which can be great from an aesthetic standpoint. But if you're solely talking about growing the actual fibers, then it's going to be different.
Totally. It's funny that you mentioned that method. I just last month created a new training program for some of my clients, and exactly with that method. Well, I tweaked it a little bit. I think it's normally 8x8 with like 45 seconds in between or whatever. And I was a little bit more gracious and gave them 6x8. But yeah, literally everyone, I don't want to say they've been complaining, but they were like, whoa, it looks so easy on paper. And then 2 days later, you're like, ouch, my butt. Like it seems to be very effective. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. And like a super good way to get the best of both worlds would be like, maybe you have like a quad focused leg day and you did like the Geronda method for your glutes and your hamstrings. And then the other day you had a glute and hamstring focused leg day where you did lower reps, and then you did pumpy stuff for quads and calves.
Yeah,
you could
perfect.
like literally do them both at the same time.
Amazing. No, I think that's a really good tip. Awesome. Well, thank you, Taylor. I want to honor your time. I'm wondering if you might have like 1 or 2 last words of wisdom for the listeners, in the sense of, if there's one thing they could do to improve their quality of life or thinking about life, what might that be?
Oh gosh, I think the most important that any human could do to maximize their abilities would be to get into breath work and meditation and take them seriously, because you probably have no idea the amount of trauma that you've gone through throughout your life, whether it's intentional or not, or you recognize it or not. I think that in and of itself would make everybody progress far faster than they can imagine.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And lastly, if you can share your social media handles with us, that would be awesome also, so people can go and follow you.
Yeah, so my Instagram, I really just have Instagram, and it's just _Taylor22. Otherwise, that is basically the only way to reach me.
Perfect. Well, everyone go and follow Taylor. And once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode on social. Very much appreciated. You can also follow us on Instagram at Nutrition Coaching and Life, or head to our website, www.nutritioncoachingandlife.com, where we provide more valuable content. Have a wonderful day. Now go out and work on your best self.